And how's it going, everyone? And welcome to No Fun Allowed. Today, you are joined by several fantastic guests here. We have Frederick Wheeler from How to D&D, Caleb Ebb from Blandco, and Mark from Dungeon Class. Say hi, everyone.
Hey
Hi.
everyone.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about the hobby that we love so much, D&D, and we're going to be diving into a whole bunch of zany questions, talking about our DM styles, our preferences, and whatever else comes up. So let's get right down to it. Let's start asking those questions, Frederick.
So this is actually the fourth round of the Dungeon Master Roundtable, and I put these questions together because I was desperate and I had no idea what else to do, and I figured you guys could handle these questions at the very last minute. So here's what we've got. How do you manage character death in your game of Dungeons and Dragons or your RPG games, and why do you do it that way?
Yeah. So my name is No Fun Allowed, and there's a reason for that. I kill PCs frequently, not enough to the point where you're automatically dead in my campaigns, but enough where you're always sweating, right? I kill characters all the time, and it keeps people on edge. The thing is I never want anyone to walk away from the table pissed off at me. I never want people to point fingers and say, screw you, it was all your fault, you were cheating, or you're unfair. I always want them to think to themselves they could have gotten out of that situation somehow, whether they ran away, or if they just rolled better dice, or if they planned better, etc., etc. I never want them to be angry at me, because when we sit down to play this game, we want to actually not be angry at each other. In regards of actually handling the death, it depends on the scenario. Sometimes maybe you don't die. Maybe you're captured. Maybe instead of you dying, that was some clone, and I snapped to the real you somewhere else, far away. And maybe you are going to get resurrected, a few minutes later. But every once in a while, or more than likely, your character dies. And in which case, you've got to bring a new one to the table. Something I do personally is I do one-on-ones for all of my characters to bring them into the campaigns. So I do this at the beginning of the campaign, and then during the course of the campaign, if anybody dies, then I do a one-on-one with them before the start of the next session, and to drive them into the narrative without it feeling too forced. So what about you, Mark?
Yeah, I too kill characters occasionally. And honestly, I'm very clear up front that this is a dangerous game and that characters do die, and that's part of the game. In fact, it's critical to the game to make it exciting. And there's been times that even I'm on the other side, I'm playing, and I'm like, yeah, my character should die in this situation. The other players are like, oh, it's terrible. Like, no, that's what should have happened. This is what I rolled poorly. This is what happened. So I'm really, really serious about that. However, in my game, when someone dies, I do allow them to re-roll a character. That is something I allow. So it actually, I let them feel that pain. And Gonzo, he's more hardcore. He tears up their character sheet, which is pretty final for sure. But I do allow them to re-roll a new character, and that often kind of helps the sting a little bit. And they're kind of in the back of their mind, they've been thinking about trying another character, and also it gives them that opportunity. So, but that's how I handle character death. What about you, Caleb?
Well, what I like to do during dungeon crawls is I want to make sure that the players walk away from the table angry. And I want them to point fingers at me and say, you're cheating. I want them to be as angry as possible. And I want them to be as upset as possible. Because defeating me in a dungeon crawl is an accomplishment. During my first convention, I had a bunch of people that were subscribed to my channel that I was running a game and they all wanted to play. And only half of them managed to escape that dungeon alive. Their characters. I've been
very important distinction there.
Yeah, I've been told that player death in D&D is actually frowned upon pretty much everywhere. So I guess the game it's not as hardcore as I remember from the 80s. In any case, so it's very much different depending on like what kind of game. There can be a campaign where maybe the tone is different and it's more RPG. There can be a campaign where the tone is very different and it's kind of like a mix. Certain people are trying to do certain things. With a future question, I'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, you know, definitely, I definitely consider the players that are playing the game and what kind of thing is actually happening with the campaign and story. I think that certain settings and stuff lend itself to a more, you know, strictly by the book. D&D 5e, as I have said a million times before, is a very brutal, hardcore game from level 1 to level 20. People that say the early levels are easier and the higher levels are just a cakewalk, I don't understand where that comes from. But yeah, no, that is, I like to approach things in that fashion. But with dungeon crawls, I'm still angry that one 13-year-old managed to beat that dungeon crawl, because every single one of the adults around that table during that game, during that library event, they all died. Their characters all died, but that one 13-year-old outsmarted me. So, Frederick, what are your issues?
Well, as you know, Caleb, I have many issues. But when it comes to character death, I have far too much to say about it. I think I've done 3 videos on TPKs and like 4 videos on character death. And I've come to the conclusion, for me, when I deal with character death, is I put it in the player's hands. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So if they want to roll up a new character, roll up a new character. If they want to bring it back to life because they've got the means to do that for the party through magic or whatever else, cool. And if they don't, and they need me to be engaged to make that happen, then I usually build in a consequence. That's sort of how I do it. But they can work off that consequence for whatever's happened with their character. Maybe it's a favor to a god, or there's lots of different ways. And I'm not going to go into all of them because I've done videos to death. But why do I do it that way? And the reality is, for me, is I just don't want the stress to have to deal with players who cry at my table because their character died. I don't want to have to deal with having to manage people.
I will say,
grown men and women breaking down because their character has died. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I remember my nephew one day taught me a huge lesson. We were playing through Dark Sun. I love Dark Sun. All my players hated Dark Sun. His character died. And I said, okay, make a new character. Because this was back in the day when I was like, when you die, you make a new character. So he came back and he had made the character and it's exactly the same as the other character. The only difference is he put a number 2 in front of it. And I was like, he's just made a point, hasn't he? Yeah, he's going to make another character, but it's exactly the same character. So I just let them deal with all of that and they make the decision. And I know a lot of people say, yeah, but if you do that, they're always going to want their character to come back. And actually that doesn't happen in my games. Quite often the players say, no, I'm going to roll up a new character. I'm going to make it build a new character. That one died. We're moving on. I was like, okay.
Just a quick show of hands here. How many people have actually there? You can make a player laugh during a game. You can make a player shout during a game. How many people have actually made players cry during games?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's not so unnatural to happen during D&D.
Well, the thing to consider too is crying isn't necessarily out of pain and misery. There can also be tears of joy as well.
That's true.
But from this crowd, it probably isn't that case. But you know, there's a number of reasons you can cry, and that's okay. You're allowed to cry. Presumably, if you're playing in a game of D&D, you're playing with your friends and you're in a safe space, and you can let your emotions go. Plus, it makes us feel awesome when we make people cry. So.
So let us know down in the comments how you manage character death in your games and why.